Today is the 16th of April, 2010. We are at the Malta, New York Community Center Library, which is a satellite branch of the Round Lake Library. And my name is Wayne Clark. I'm with the New York State Military Museum and Veterans Research Center in Saratoga Springs, New York. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and your date and place of birth, please?
Todd F. Butler, Troy, New York, September 4th, 1928.
Did you attend school in Troy?
Yes, public school and RPI.
All right. What year did you graduate from high school, and where did you graduate from?
Troy High School, June 1945.
Let me go back a little bit. Do you recall where you were when you heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, I remember Roosevelt's speech the next day, right, what came over the radio. We only had a radio in our house at that time. Yeah.
How did life change for you during World War II?
We got involved in scrap drives. We got involved in all kinds of effort to support the troops and everything that was going on. And of course, my father worked in a blast furnace in Troy, New York, and boy, they were busy times. They were producing as much pig iron as they possibly could all through the whole war. They never shut down the blast furnace for the whole war period.
Did your family experience any sort of shortages, food shortages, etc.?
Oh, well, everything was coupons for any of your meats or anything. And for gasoline, all gasoline was rationed. You had to have coupons to get gas and everything. So there was a serious shortage of a lot of things.
Did your family have a car?
Yeah, my father had a car. But during the war, the only thing he would do was take him and his friends to work and back. That's all. And they had to do a sharing of a car because of gas rationing.
Did you have any family members in the service?
Yeah, I had brother-in-law, I had cousins and everything. They were all in the service. Yep.
What was it like in Troy when the war ended? Was there a lot of celebration?
Oh, it was a big day, right? And celebration, right? And they had parades and all kinds of things going on. Yep.
And after you graduated from high school in 1945?
45.
And did you go on to college right away?
Yes, I went to RPI and everything. And RPI was on an accelerated schedule because of returning veterans and everything. They had a huge enrollment, more than they'd had in a long time. So you kept going summertime right on through, one term after another.
What was it like with the veterans there?
It was a big transition for some of the veterans coming back to go back to college life, but they were covered with a GI Bill. And a lot of them really developed them. Some of my friends ended up head of development division down in Waterbury Arsenal, because when they got out, they were dedicated to get a good education, and they were good men.
Did you have a scholarship at RPI?
No, I didn't, right? But the tuition was $425 a year.
Well, that was still a lot of money back then.
Oh, that was a lot of money, yep, but, right?
Did you work part-time at all?
Yeah, I started working for General Electric in '46 in Schenectady in the steam turbine department. And they had a co-op program where you could work whenever you had any time, because they had more orders than you could work all the hours you wanted, you know.
Now, was this affiliated with RPI?
Oh, RPI and Union and GE always were kind of affiliated.
Okay.
Right? Some of the GE leaders had graduated from RPI, and in turn they were helping the school out. Yep.
What course of study did you pursue at RPI?
Mechanical engineering program, which is a lot different now than it was then. But
Did you find the course of study very demanding or difficult?
yeah, it was always a tough school to, right, you had to spend some hours on the books, you know, late at night to try and keep up. You know? And I made it, right? I wouldn't say I made it head of the class, but I made it.
Now, you continued to work for GE right up until the point of graduation and then beyond?
I was only working part-time for General Electric, and then when I graduated, they put me on their test engineering program immediately.
Okay.
I got out in January and I went to work the next week.
Do you want to tell us about that program? Was that here in Malta?
Well, the test engineering program, I went to Malta, was part of Aeronautics and Ordnance Division in Building 28 in Schenectady. So they put me in Building 28 in Schenectady, where I served a 3-month period down there doing basic work. Then they sent me on an assignment to Malta for 3 months. Then I got hired out here to Malta, and I stayed there.
Now, where were you living at the time you were sent to Malta?
Yeah, I lived on a farm, you know, with my mother and father over in Troy.
Over in Troy. How did you commute back and forth?
Well, see, there was such a large number of people at the site. There was 450 here at the site. There was 550 at the production plant and another 150 at the racetrack. The production plant was at Campbell Avenue plant. And then there were 200 people at White Sands Missile Range, which was all part of this effort. So there was too much congestion for people. The Army had buses that took everybody from General Electric in Schenectady to the Malta site, Army buses, every day, and returned them at night. So I used to meet the bus at Clifton Park Hotel. There were a bunch of us that met at Clifton Park Hotel and get on the bus and come up here.
Okay, you went from Clifton Park up to here by bus.
By bus, and I left everything, my car, at Clifton Park Hotel.
Okay. Do you want to tell us about the site, what it was like working there? Anything you want to discuss?
Well, see, I came later, of course, 40. The first rocket firing was in 45, but you got to go to do the aerial survey that they did out of Schenectady with a Piper Cub. They flew over the area and found Luther's Forest. See, they needed at least a 1-mile safety zone for safety purposes. Calculations indicated that if one of these rockets exploded, that some of the fragments go at least a mile. Now, we never really experienced the whole safety zone, but we experienced quite a bit of it. I mean, you know.
Now these rockets, were these actual German rockets?
Well, the German hardware came into Schenectady, the V2s, and they were assembled in Schenectady. They went directly to White Sands Missile Range for the test firing program run by General Electric.
Now, White Sands, was that in New Mexico?
New Mexico.
Okay.
Yep. So that was the German hardware. The actual hardware that was developed here, the first one, the A1, was done right per German designs. The only thing they did was change drawings to manufacture to SAE standards and get rid of. So the A1 was the first production. There was an A1 that always sat at the corner of Hermes Road and Dunning Street. Oh, this is all a U.S. Army effort paid for by U.S. And that A1 is now in Smithsonian Institute. There's another A1 at Redstone Arsenal, and there's one at White Sands. But it's unfortunate they never saved one for back here at the site. And then the A3, the next generation thing, was a missile that was designed by General Electric Company and manufactured in Schenectady, the 500 people that I told you, and tested here, and then shipped from here to White Sands. And there's some A3 missiles at White Sands Museum. Yep. So now the A1 and A3 was only part of the program back there. That was the rockets that the Army funded GE to develop. The Army was also interested in high energy fuel, right? Super fuels. The die-boring plant and pentaboring plant was in Building 20 back here, and that was operated by Olin Matheson Corporation. They had a bad explosion there back in the production days of this stuff, and even though the fuel seemed to have everything that it was too hazardous to handle. Our test firings with die-boring and pentaboring, of course, that's part of the high energy stuff. And you went from die-boring, pentaboring to UDMH, unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine, and red fuming nitric acid. And then you went to isolde. There was a whole bunch of monopropellants that the Army was interested in for high energy. And then the hydrazine nitrates, right, for guns. And then the hydroxyl ammonium nitrate was the last one that was here. So that was the high energy fuel work back there. Then you had the Ramjet program. The Army was very interested in, besides the rockets, Ramjet Propulsion.
Do you want to explain that to us, what that entails?
Well, once you get airframe up to sufficient speed, you don't need a jet engine compressor or anything. The air itself, you can compress and ignite with fuel and have propulsion with a ramjet facility. So that was in Building 21. And you needed a huge air supply for a ramjet, you know. There was 10 Allison 1,300 horse aircraft engines driving air compressors that were the air supply for the ramjet test cell. So it was a big complex for the air supply. And then the ramjet testing was under a fellow by the name of Walter Dankoff, was head of the ramjet program back here. I'm not sure if he's alive yet or anymore, but he was out in a NASA facility near Cleveland.
How many buildings were back there?
Well, they were all numbered and they went to 27, okay? Now some of them were small buildings, but some of them were good sized buildings. The main office building was Building 14. And if you walked through 14, you could see all the different things that were there. There was a turbo pump office. There were valve and piping office. There was peroxide decomposer facilities. There were basic research, and then advanced propellant work was done back there. So, and of course, to support these rockets, you needed high-pressure gas facility. It was a gas plant where you could pressurize the A1 to, that was 7,500 PSI helium driven. It was a simple rocket, but it needed some high-pressure gas. And the A1s and A3s, they were 3,000 PSI nitrogen driven. I guess I didn't talk about hydrogen peroxide. Well, I didn't talk about the propellants.
No.
Because the propellants were really the propellants that Hitler decided on a long time ago. When you had all the basic technology, we were so far behind them in this thing. You look at the documentation of the number of shots they fired at England, you know, between that B-1 and the V-2 rocket. And they were launched all. A good record of those launchings and everything is in Time, History of World War II. Tells you just how many were fired and everything. And at that time, the United States Army didn't have any rockets that could compare. That's why there was a big panic to get this tech valley going, you know?
Were there any German scientists working there?
The German people, well, if you look at Project Paperclip, which is the regional General Electric involvement with a German program, they came mostly out of GE General Engineering Lab in Schenectady, went over to Germany, and as soon as the troops captured the places, they went in and interrogated, you know. All that stuff is documented, really, on the German. And the German scientists that were kept, they were sent to Fort Bliss out there where they were harbored. And then they moved them from Fort Bliss to Redstone Arsenal afterwards. And they actually became the backbone of the Army program because the Army had these people, this technology and everything else, at Redstone Arsenal, where they developed the Redstone missile and that kind of stuff down there. So there were a few Germans that visited here, and of course you could interrogate them at any time and send a letter out, and they'd reply and say, this is why we did it this way. Well, they decided Hitler didn't want any interference with his main army fuel requirements. He decided a long time ago, same things that we're deciding now with ethanol in our gas. It's got to be ethanol fired, propelled and everything, because we can raise this and it's renewable resource. So the main propellants on these things were ethanol, alcohol, and liquid oxygen, which he just produced from compressed air, you know, compressed plant. Yep.
Now, while we were working here after the war on the rocket projects, the Russians, they were basically doing the same thing that we were doing. Were they more advanced than us, or did we have the edge on them?
We thought that we were going to beat the Russians into orbit, right? And, you know, the Russians beat us into orbit. with our Sputnik and everything. So I guess I have to say, yeah, they were ahead of us. But we were right on their tail, I think. You know, we were close. But close is not good enough, I guess, sometimes.
What about the military presence? Was there a permanent military installation here?
We were under Rochester Ordnance section, and all the design work and everything was done by the Army Corps of Engineers. All the drawings of the facilities and everything. And the Army Corps of Engineers essentially took German drawings, and those blockhouses and test stands that are back there, you can find the same thing in Peenemünde, you know. I mean, I've run into visitors that came here that are amazed because they're duplicate facilities of the German test site. So Army Corps of Engineers did all the construction of that. And as far as the next generation of rockets, General Electric took care of designing them. As far as facilities, they were the basic German facilities.
Now, did that facility run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, or did they shut down periodically?
They kind of pushed the thing as you could work plenty of overtime back there. And as I told you, the first firing was on Christmas Day. They were working in 1945, when that was the first rocket firing back there. Yep. And then, of course, it kept building up and up till, you know, around here it was common to hear the roar, you know, and feel the vibration from the place, you know. And nobody seemed to complain at that time of the noise situation. We didn't get any complaints till way up in the 70s or something before people started to complain. And that was mainly due to the gun firing work back here. Really, the rocket, they put up with the rockets, but the gun work got into noise complaints with the state, and we had to do all kind of effort to suppress the noise from the gun range.
When did they move from rocketry to guns?
In 1964, the commanding officer at Watervliet Arsenal came up and visited the place and decided that we better utilize some of the facilities here. And at that time, they thought that Watervliet Arsenal might take the place over. But they decided against it, but they continued to do work with us right on up to when we closed the doors.
Was there ever any underground testing done at all?
People always talked about underground testing, but the only way we could quiet down the noise of some of the facilities was with earth cover. In other words, the firing tunnels, if you go back there and look at it, you'll see have been completely covered over with dirt because that suppresses the noise radiation from the place and so on. And the rocket test cells were the same thing. They were fired in rooms that were underground, and they had to exit out the back end for noise purposes and for safety. In the event of explosion or anything, as long as it was underground, you didn't throw stuff, you know, into the safety zone.
Were there any serious accidents while you were working there?
Yes, there was quite a few. I mentioned the dye boring plant explosions, which killed some people. I mentioned some of the facilities. We had a bad Isolde explosion that rocked the area. We had a Han explosion. Most of them were minor injuries, except this last accident, which is in court at the present time.
When did this last one happen?
90, 94, 94. It's about right anyway. It's going to trial at the present time.
And what happened there basically?
They were scrapping an old rocket facility, and I guess I better be careful what I say. There was scrapping a rocket facility, and there was an explosion from the propellants in the rocket tank, which ended up killing 2 and seriously injuring 2. And so that's sort of the major accidents. I got to think about this. I know there were some that weren't hazardous, right?
Okay. You mentioned the company being sold. Another outfit took it over. Wright something, was it?
Oh. See, the test site was owned by United States Army, and I told you at one time Watervliet Arsenal thought about taking the site over. When Watervliet turned it down, it was declared excess to the needs of the Department of Defense, the test site back here. It was put up for sale in 1963 by General Services Administration. And General Services ended up selling it to the Atomic and Space Development Authority of the state of New York, which had visions of having space-related industry back here and some. And once Atomic and Space Development Authority took it over, General Electric became the contractor operator for ASDA, Atomic and Space. And we essentially did rocket firing work for them. We did testing work for, we were trying to develop the state into the space business. They were wanting to get a chunk of it, the authority, which later on they didn't quite make it. So it was taken over by the Energy Research and Development Agency from the original group.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when did they take over?
It was sold in '63. ASDA started operations in '64. They took over immediately.
Okay.
General Electric was the contractor operator. ASDA just had a few people at this site. And they proceeded to do business in the space area. But as far as rocket engine work, that was sort of the end. See, General Electric and the rocket engine business, it was moved, the business was transferred from aeronautics in Schenectady to Aircraft Gas Turbine Division in Evendale, Ohio. And as we talked about, they had a different outlook on business than the original crew, right? And the rocket engine section had short life with a Vanguard engine. They worked on the X405 engine, which I got some pictures of the engine and the Vega engine and so on. But the rocket engine section in Evendale, Ohio, the business went downhill and they phased out, really, moved out of here.
Okay. And you mentioned the company, the last company here was the Wright Malta Corporation?
Yes. We also did, besides the gun testing work, we did work on a hydromechanical transmission for Army Tank Automotive Command, right, out in Warren, Michigan. And it was done on an experimental basis for a number of years back here. You know, there's a tank test course back here with a certain grades and elevations. and everything to run track vehicles on. We did numerous 10,000-mile tests on track vehicles and everything. And lo and behold, the transmission, a hydromechanical GE transmission, gained favor in the Army. And they started looking at it for production vehicles, like the Scout vehicle and the main battle tank and everything. Now, once it went into production, General Electric decided it's not going to build a production plant here in the woods. They moved it to Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And we were all told to pack up and go to Pittsfield Ordnance Department, you know. Well, Gene Wright and some of the engineering people says, look, there's still a testing business that we can keep going here. Let's organize a company and stay here, because the state was interested in anybody that wanted to rent a place at this time. So that's what happened there. The main transmission program was moved over there, which amounted to a multi-million-dollar business for General Electric Company, you probably know, with a number of transmissions that they built for different vehicles and so on. And then finally that business they sold to General Dynamics. General Dynamics is still producing the transmissions, right, for main battle tanks, Scout vehicles, all kinds of track vehicles. Yep.
And you continued to stay on here.
That was 1972 when they left. Yep.
And you stayed from 72 to 97?
Yes.
And what was it like here during that period?
Well, here's a small group of GE engineers that have organized a company and trying to keep things going and make money back here. And we had some tough times in the beginning, right, where we had to face cutback in wages and this kind of stuff just to keep going.
Yeah.
And all the while, the Army gun program seemed to be going along enough to support us. Watervliet Arsenal's gun testing work and Picatinny's testing work. And all of a sudden along came this liquid propellant gun program, which was a very rapid firing 155 that was liquid fueled, right? And General Electric had big contracts for this thing in Pittsfield. And of course, we had the firing range and everything, so here we are, a bunch of their ex-employees, and they had to come back and do business with us, but that was a big boost in our operation back here for a number of years. Yep.
What about during Desert Storm? Did the workload increase? Did you receive more contracts?
Way back in the Vietnam War, we saw an increase in when it came to Desert Storm, business went along fairly as usual. The weapons that they developed at Watervliet Arsenal were now into production. We never got involved in the production firing tests for Watervliet. Our main agency was the Benet Lab, development of new weapons, whether it was tank guns, artillery, mortars, right, recoilless rifles, that whatever their charter was at Watervliet Arsenal to develop, we get the development work here. The production, firing and everything was all done at Aberdeen Proving Ground. It wouldn't, that was the Army's baby, you know. You just do the development work, we'll take care of the production, testing. So, but it turned out to be quite a lucrative business, you know, toward the end. It was as good as rockets, you know, because you had all the facilities to handle hazardous propellants. And we didn't know how hazardous it was. I mean, the performance was outstanding. As you probably know, we had another bad explosion here in the middle of the night, right, 1 o'clock in the morning or something like that, that blew the main storage tank and everything, and all kinds of shrapnel pieces and everything. And that was the start of the downfall of the liquid gun program in the Army. They decided that no matter what kind of stabilizers they used or anything, they still had stuff that was too hazardous to put in the field. It worked great in a hospital kind of environment. Once you got out in the mud and the sand and everything and got any kind of contamination, you could have big problems with it. So the advantages of the system, they had a lot longer range artillery, a lot higher velocity, a lot higher. You could shape the pressure time curve in a gun. In other words, instead of having a pressure curve that spikes up like this with conventional solid propellants, you could make the liquid propellant through injection, make a square curve, which made a lot more energy into the projectile, and you could cut down on the weight of the gun tube appreciably because your pressure was down lower, but it was a push all the way to the muzzle of the gun. So it had a lot of advantages, but you just couldn't field it. And that was the end of that program.
What about, you mentioned hazardous waste and contamination. Was there a problem with that, dealing with that at this facility here?
Well, back in the 40s, you know, there was a different outlook on hazardous kind of materials than when Environmental Protection Agency got in. Environmental Protection Agency spent like $3 or $4 million. The report is very well documented. I know a copy's in the Round Lake Library of their cleanup effort here, because some of this stuff we buried in the ground, right? Because it was pretty hazardous. It all had to be excavated and shipped away, and so it was pretty costly to clean up the site.
Do you think they did a pretty good job cleaning it up?
Yeah, a very good job. Because the people that bought the site from us, Saratoga Economic and Development Commission, the only thing they come back on us for selling the place was 2 fuel oil tanks, which, you know, we came to agreement on cleaning the fuel oil tanks up and getting that site cleaned up, but all the basic stuff. The Environmental Protection Agency came in here with underground radar, which they mapped the whole site with underground radar. They could tell if you buried, you know, pieces of projectile they could see in the ground. So you couldn't hide anything or anything. Everything was pretty obvious once you went to the radar mapping of the site, the ground, and everything.
Okay.
Now, we did end up with, as you probably know, contaminated wells back there because of carbon tetrachloride that we use for cleaning the oxygen system. Liquid oxygen systems, you have to be very careful. There's no, you know, residue fuel oil or any kind of lubricants or anything. And so we use carbon tetrachloride. And at that time, once we cleaned, we dumped it in the ground. Well, it got in the water system. And, right, they've spent a lot of money monitoring the wells back there for contamination. And we put in an aeration system. The way to get the carbon tetrachloride out of the groundwater is you take it up into a tower and come down through a whole set of baffles where the air comes up through, and the air will take the carbon tetrachloride out of the water. So we ran that aeration facility for a number of years. And you can see groundwater clearing up. Yeah. So groundwater was part of the problem.
Okay. And were you there right up until the end, or did you retire before they closed?
I retired before the place went up for auction. I come back, I remember, in to the auction where everything was auctioned off, all the machine tools, all office furniture, everything was sold, you know, at a big auction that went on for 2 days back there. And that was the second auction, really, when the state, going way back, when the state bought it. The state had an auction there to sell off a lot of support equipment and everything. They try and get their money back. The state paid $371,000 for the site. And I think in that auction they got back all the, because there was a lot of stainless steel and aluminum and regular steel back there as supplies that they sold to get, because their business didn't turn out to be profitable, so that's how they got their money back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what have you been doing since you retired?
Well, I'm just, right at the present time, the Malta old timers have a luncheon every couple months. At the present time, I'm getting out the announcement to all the old timers, and we're right down to about 12 now, or 14, so you can see we've had a bad attrition, you know, over the years. Our luncheons keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, let me just go back to that a little bit. What about health effects to the workers that worked on those projects? Was there, I don't know if you know, if there was like a high incidence of cancers, lung diseases, etc.?
I was operated on for colon cancer, of course, 5 years ago. There's a class action lawsuit that's going on where they get all the information from you and say, now, how's your health? And report to us and so on. So it's a long-term thing, I think, with carbon tetrachloride, and of course we had some of the PCB stuff too.
Yeah, I know carbon tet is considered a carcinogen, so I was just wondering if a lot of people were lost from, you know, the effects of handling it.
I think there's a law outfit that keeps a record and things from a legal point of view. The only legal thing that we have now still remaining long after we went out of business is this lawsuit concerning the explosion at Test Area 3, which killed 2 people and seriously injured 2 others. It's still in process.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else you'd like to touch on that we didn't cover?
Well, the early history, I guess I talked to you about the Army's real interest was back in the early 40s. That's when the Army was trying to catch up on their program and everything. Dr. Richard Porter was head of, it started out with Project Paperclip, where they went over to Germany and interviewed people and started shipping hardware back. Then it went to Project Hermes, which was under Dr. Richard Porter. I worked for Edward Hull, who was head of, these were all people that came from Germany, you know, had been in the German interrogation program. He was head of engine development work back there. And then Robinson and so on. The early crew back there, they had a very active American Rocket Society. If you look in the Journal of American Rocket Society, right, way back, you'll find discussions from people back at this site here. Dr. Kurt Berman with his wind motor. Here he took a rocket engine and put a wind in the side where he could take pictures of the combustion process. And this is where they came up with a like-on-like injection system for oxygen and alcohol motors and so on. You'll find early reports on this fellow Bob Havlin was talking about communication satellites and weather satellites back in the 50s. I thought he was always a dreamer. And nowadays, you look at what his papers are very interesting. He was so far ahead of his time. Well, that's how GE got involved in the system. He was always preaching this satellite stuff, right? Because the Army looked at this thing as a long-range gun. That's what they wanted. They saw what the Germans did to England and London with V2s and V1s, and there's no defense against it, you know, with these supersonic missiles and so on. So the Army was looking at this thing as, aha, better than our conventional artillery. We can have some long-range guns and that was their concept. But the research people at General Electric could see the visions of all different kinds of satellite operations. And some of those early American Rocket Society reports are interesting because they're, I think, way ahead of their time. You know? And of course, the American Rocket Society in the Schenectady area has been for years. There's no more rocket interest around here. Yep. So you have to go way back to see what they were doing back there. I just mentioned a couple of the things, right? But the plug nozzle engine was worked on extensively back here by Dr. Al Graham, and that turned out to be a terrific propulsion development and so on. And I guess if you think about things, there were a lot of patents for different kinds of rocket engine concepts that were developed back in the development division. So I guess if you really want to study it in detail, the General Electric Company has archives. The Army Corps of Engineers have got archives. And, I told you, some of the hardware from here is now at the Smithsonian Aerospace Museum. Some of it's at White Sands Missile Range. And you can go, the German museum is at Peenemünde, and they have a lot of the original German hardware at the Peenemünde Museum. So you can dive right into it and find all kinds of information when you get in. And I think the Department of Defense hearings, it took them years to get declassified on Project Paperclip, But you can read all about the interrogation work and the V2 firing program and everything. And as an Army contractor, you were required to issue progress reports every month on what you were doing on everything from individual oxygen valves to fuel valves to the turbo pump to the main airframe. And those, I believe, are all on microfiche, right? That you could say, what kind of oxygen valve did you use, or what kind of, you talked about like-on-like injection. Tell me more about what that it does to performance of rockets. And so it's all documented in those reports.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I'm not sure that I told you. We started talking about the site. We had our own fire department. We had our own support machine shop. It wasn't to make production items. It was just to service stuff out here.
If things broke down, you
When things broke down, the main fabrication was in Campbell Avenue plant in Schenectady. We had our own police force. We had a lot of Army vehicles. I mentioned the Army buses that brought you from Schenectady to here. We had Army Jeeps and Army trucks and Army cranes and bulldozers and everything. Whatever you needed, the Army made sure you had to keep things going. So it was an interesting time.
Yes, it definitely sounds like it was.
Yeah, right. It was the original Tech Valley. So if you add up the number of people that was involved in this thing back here, they have to go a long ways in Tech Valley to catch them, I'll tell you. They're talking about 1,000 or 2,000, right? The rocket program was very extensive, right? And as we talked before, General Electric was interested in helping the Army catch up because they were so far behind. So they did all the work at absolute minimum profit, right? $1 a year kind of, operation, which is tough to find nowadays. Profit.
All right, well, thank you so much for your interview.
Oh, you're welcome.